Hello friends, welcome to CivilsWrite YouTube channel. My name is Avinash Agarwal and in this video I'll be continuing with my discussion on 2024 UPSC Civil Services Mains Examination General Studies 2 paper. In part 1 video we have already discussed first 10 questions. This video I'll be focusing on the remaining 10 questions. So let us start with the first question, right? So the first question that is there in front of our screen is, what are the aims and objects of the recently passed and enforced Public Examination Prevention of Unfair Means Act 2024? Whether University State Education Board examinations too are covered under the Act. So it's a very current affairs based question that has been asked in the examination. This does not require a very deep theoretical understanding of anything, except for the fact that you need to be aware why this law has been created and what this law entails, right? So Public Examination Prevention of Unfair Means Act 2024, it's a very important legislation in India because we have seen that in our public examinations there is mass cheating, copying, leakage of papers, corrupt bureaucrats involved at the local level in the exam conduction process have been implicated in a number of cases. Looking at all of these things, looking at the fact that unfair means they hurt the career prospects of thousands of candidates and causes a lot of waste of the public exchequer. Keeping all these things in mind, this law has been passed, right? We want to uphold the credibility of our educational assessment system. We want to make sure that the integrity of the recruitment as well as the education system is maintained along with the objects of fairness and transparency, right? So we have imposed stringent penalties as is expected out of this kind of a law on any individual or institution which is either involved or facilitating any of these unfair practices, right? So you have to highlight the prevention of cheating and malpractice as one of the major aims and objectives, right? We want to prevent cheating, impersonation, use of unfair means during public examinations, whether it is electronic gadgets, any kind of collusion, any kind of corruption, we want to penalize pretty heavily, right? So it has been found that there have been candidates who have been able to cheat UPSC, who have been able to cheat state level recruitment tests by one mechanism or the other. Okay, Munna Bhai MBBS looks good in a movie, but when it becomes a reality, it becomes a real pain. Okay, and we don't want this pain. Ensuring integrity and credibility. We want to restore public confidence. That is very, very important in this entire process. We want to penalize those who are involved in such activities. All right. We want to enhance the accountability of our institutions, of our officials involved in this entire process. Any lapse in security, any kind of malpractice will be punishable under the law. So even exam authorities, they must now get their acts right. They must now implement a surveillance system, a biometric identification, stringent invigilation methods so that the provisions of the Act can be upheld. We have criminalized unfair practices if you're highlighting key provisions. So we have penalized, we have criminalized unfair practices, right? We will be imposing imprisonment for a variety of number of years, hefty fines depending upon the severity of the offenses committed. There will also be protection to whistleblowers that we will be providing. There will also be penalties for electronic cheating of any kind whatsoever, whether it is through Bluetooth devices or any other kind of device, right? The scope of the Act, right? So right now it is applicable to public and competitive examinations. That's number one, right? It does cover university examinations, state education board exams as well, including class 10 and class 12 board exams, right? So that at those levels also we are able to ensure an element of integrity and transparency and honesty, right? And private institutions which are conducting their own entrance tests or exam, they are also covered under the Act if they are recognized by state or national bodies. There are certain challenges in implementation in this law, as is true in almost any law in India, that how do you ensure strict monitoring, right? Because if you want to actually uphold the letter and spirit of the law, that would require very stringent monitoring, right? And for that we would require a lot of manpower, a lot of human resource, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of technical know-how. Do we have that ready on day zero? I don't think so. So we will have to spend some amount of time and bandwidth in getting these resources ready. Judicial burden will definitely increase because of this particular law also on the statute books, right? So there will be an increased number of cases that we will have to handle, and we will have to handle it quickly, because these examinations, when there are allegations of malpractices, you cannot take years and decades for the results to come out. The results need to come out fairly quickly, so that the further steps can be taken by the relevant exam conducting authority. So this is the basic idea that you need to be able to highlight about this particular law, right? So definitely this is a progressive step towards safeguarding the sanctity of public examinations and academic assessments in India, right? The idea is that we want to criminalize malpractice and establish strict penalties. We want to ensure meritocracy in the entire process. It has a wide applicability to universities as well as states, education board exams, and so on and so forth, right? Success definitely depends upon robust implementation, proactive monitoring, and finally settlement of the cases quickly by the relevant judicial authorities. This is what you need to be able to highlight about this particular law. Moving ahead to the next question. Right to privacy is the subject matter of this question. So right to privacy is intrinsic to life and personal liberty, and it is inherently protected under Article 21 of the Constitution. We have to explain this particular statement. Once you have explained, then we have to, in this particular light, discuss the law relating to DNA testing of child in the womb to establish its paternity. See, the idea over here is that my right to privacy is available to me because I am a life form. Child in womb is also a life form. When we are performing a paternity test on a child who is still in the womb, have we taken the child's permission? Can we take that child's permission? We can't. So isn't that invading that life's right to privacy? Is the basic question that is getting tested over here. A fairly tricky question to answer if you have zero idea about this particular DNA testing of child in the womb to establish paternity wala law. So this right to privacy, whenever you are speaking about it, you must mention that it is a fundamental right. You must mention the case Puttaswamy versus Union of India judgment of 2017, and the fact that this right is embedded in Article 21 of the Constitution of India. So this particular right, it ensures individuals' right to life and personal liberty, right? And your right to personal liberty, it is inviolable without the due legal process, right? So sensitive issues like DNA testing to establish paternity, there have been concerns regarding the privacy, bodily autonomy, as well as the legal boundaries which are getting tested when you are performing this kind of a paternity test, right? So first we have to explain right to privacy via Article 21. We have already mentioned that KS Puttaswamy case has to be mentioned over here, that through this case the Supreme Court of India reaffirmed the right to privacy and said that it is intrinsic to Article 21, which guarantees your right to life and personal liberty. So these words have to come as it is in your answers. You cannot not mention these words in your answers, right? So privacy, why is it important? Because your right to life and personal liberty is meaningless if your personal choices are not protected, if your autonomy is not protected, if your control over your body is not protected, if your personal information is not under your control, right? So to give you a control, to give you a sense of authority over these aspects of your own life, right to privacy is very, very helpful in that regard, right? Protection of personal information. So right to privacy, it extends to you being able to protect your information from unnecessary disclosure. It extends to you being able to keep your sensitive personal information personal, whether it is your medical data, whether it is your personal relationship, whether it is your biological identity. So DNA testing, it can reveal sensitive genetic information. We don't want to do that. And therefore there is this question that are we violating personal identity, right to privacy, when we are doing these kinds of paternity tests? Of course, there are limits on privacy as well. There are no absolute fundamental rights. On every fundamental right, you can expect some kind of logical limitations to be placed, restrictions to be placed, right? Which is what is mentioned over here, which is what you have to mention, that it is not an absolute right by any stretch of imagination. State can, does, and will infringe upon the right when it comes to public interest, when it comes to national security, when it comes to enforcing legitimate laws. And these interventions are also not absolute. These interventions are also not sacrosanct, because the judiciary will see whether these interventions are appropriate or not, reasonable or not, proportional or not, in the sense that we should not be trying to, let us say, kill a fly with a sledgehammer, is what we say in English, right? So if, let us say, as a state, I am intervening and I am violating your right to life, right to privacy, do I have legitimate reasons to do the same? And to what extent am I violating your right? So that should again be dictated by the situation which is compelling me to do. So if there is no situation which is compelling me to invade your right to privacy, violate your right to privacy, and yet I am violating your right to privacy, then that means that I am being unreasonable and my measures are not proportionate with the requirement. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. I hope that this is very clear to you. Now coming to DNA testing of a child in the womb. What are the legal and ethical considerations around the same? So first and foremost, you have to explain the purpose of DNA testing for paternity. Why are we doing it? Right? So it helps is resolve disputes over child custody, over inheritance, over personal relationships. And probably it is the only scientific way of getting a conclusive evidence about parentage. Right? Now, in case of disputed paternity, courts order DNA tests so that we can determine who the biological father is, right? And these are very important matters, right? So, what are the legal provisions for DNA testing? So, the Indian Evidence Act of 1872, it allows scientific techniques such as DNA testing to be utilized so that we can determine the truth of the matter, right? Now, obviously, there is an element that we are invading or violating somebody's privacy. So, in Bhavani Prasad Jena versus Odisha State Commission for Women, Supreme Court held that court should not order DNA tests in routine matters. So, if it is in the best interest of the child, if it is necessary for the cause of justice, you may call for a DNA test, but not randomly out of nowhere will you start calling for DNA testing. There are ethical concerns, there are privacy issues. Like I mentioned to you earlier at the start of the question, that when you are doing DNA testing of the child, right, disputed paternity, etc., so there are ethical concerns. So yes, privacy of the mother is also a very important pillar of consideration over here, but it is also the unborn child's right to dignity and identity, which somebody cannot really, vocalize anything for. The child cannot say anything at that point of time, of course, right? So for these kinds of forced DNA tests, A, violate a mother's bodily autonomy, not to ignore that aspect, but it is also an invasive procedure, right? And it can pose certain health risks as well, right? Courts will have to balance the need for DNA testing with the fundamental right to privacy, because you are intruding into a person's genetic information, and this particular measure should be justified, should be necessary, should be proportionate to the legal dispute. For instance, in the Rohit Shekhar versus Narayan Dutt Tiwari, court said that DNA testing to prove paternity, but it also emphasized that orders must be passed with caution, taking privacy concerns into account. So this is how you are supposed to balance your narrative, balance your answers. What are the legal safeguards? So there is, yes, definitely a judicial oversight, right? That the courts are there, that this measure is a last resort. Only if there is no other evidence sufficient enough to establish the truth shall we go for this. Relevance of proportionality has been highlighted. Need for a legislative framework. So right now we do not have a comprehensive legal framework to regulate DNA testing, and the DNA technology use and application regulation bill 2019, right, apparently is still a bill. International perspective, countries such as UK and US can be cited. They have very clear laws governing the use of DNA tests. We have to try and go down the same lines eventually. So we are not saying that don't do it at all. We are not saying that do it liberally, do it randomly and indiscriminately. We are saying DNA testing should be done in an appropriate manner. So right to privacy is protected under Article 21. It plays a vital role in safeguarding individuals from unwarranted intrusion into personal matters, whether it is your sensitive, including sensitive issues such as DNA, right? While we appreciate the fact that it can give you clarity in legal disputes, which is good, but at the same time, it needs to be balanced with dignity, privacy, and bodily autonomy of the individuals involved, be it the mother or the unborn child. Indian courts have played a positive role and need to continue do the delicate balancing act going ahead as well, in terms of A, developing the jurisprudence around this entire issue, and helping the creation of the entire narrative of the body of law, which will eventually go in, let us say, informing the creation of a comprehensive legislative framework on DNA testing. This is what we need to do, right? This is what your appropriate conclusion should be. I hope that this is very clear to all of you. Moving ahead to my next question. What changes has the union government recently introduced in the domain of center-state relations? Suggest measures to be adopted to build the trust between the center and the states and for strengthening federalism. So you have to be aware of what's happening around you. You have to be able to suggest measures so that we can build trust. This is more of an academic exercise, the second part, and suggest steps for strengthening federalism, again an academic exercise in the second part, right? So you can see over here that having a fair sense of what is happening in current affairs can be very helpful. Going ahead, on the CivilsWrite platform, I intend to introduce current affairs based mains answer writing program, which will be tremendously helpful for you before the examinations. All right, let us start. So center-state relationship in India is very, very important. You know that in our constitution we have created multiple levels of government. We have the central government, we have the state governments, and so on and so forth. And this relationship is not static, it is dynamic, it is ever evolving. It is evolving with the political, economic, and administrative needs of the country, right? So several reforms have been introduced, several positive steps have been taken by the central government. There have also been setbacks to these reforms every now and then. We have to be able to talk about the same over here. We have to try and talk through various different elements, whether it is through the economics element, whether it is through the governance element, whether it is through, let us say, a political science element, right? And of course, you have to highlight that ultimately it's all about mutual trust, right? So what are the recent changes? So first biggest change that you would want to highlight is the implementation of the goods and services tax. And I would advise you to maintain an overall positive stance towards the implementation of the GST Act, because we created a reasonably well functioning GST Council, which has representation from both the union as well as the states. And by and large, the decision making is done in a consensual manner. We are not applying the principle of majority vote as much as we can, and that is to the credit of our lawmakers, right? So this particular law was introduced and it resulted in a significant overhaul of our indirect tax system in India. It helped in creation of a unified tax regime. The functioning of the GST Council, which I mentioned has representative from both center and states, is helping in informed and mature decision making at the pan India level, right? So yes, there are elements of cooperation. Of course, when there are so many different stakeholders coming onto the table, so there is naturally going to be an element of friction. Yes, there are delays in compensation for revenue losses, etc. But the states have by and large been compensated and delivered what they were promised for through the GST regime, the way it has been implemented. Yes, there are teething issues, there are reforms that can be done, should be done, will be done. But in the last 7 odd years that GST has been implemented, it is, I would say, a reasonable win for center-state relations, at least in regard to this particular system is concerned. Recently, we have also created Niti Aayog, and yes, 10 years is recent in a nation's life, right? So Niti Aayog has replaced Planning Commission with lofty ideals of promoting cooperative federalism, involving states in the policy making process, acting like a think tank. Thankfully, Niti Aayog does not involve itself in the devolution of funds, and it is playing more of a consultative role, advisory role, and facilitative role. It is trying to bring about the best practices from various domains and get it implemented across the length and breadth of the country. So it's trying to play a positive role. So for instance, the aspirational districts program, which is being implemented across India. So the entire framework to gauge the progress of these aspirational districts is something which the Niti Aayog was very, very instrumental in creating and monitoring and evaluating. So this is definitely a positive step ahead. There are certain changes with regard to fiscal federalism as well. You can here mention the role of Finance Commission, right? So Finance Commission, it has given recommendations and it has evolved the revenue sharing pattern with time. So the 15th Finance Commission marginally reduced from 42% to 41%. I don't think that this is a very big negative point over here, because 1% was earmarked for the union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. So the Finance Commission reduced the share of states from 40 to 41%, but the credit is that they have by and large maintained the share of states to what it was earlier, right? Central legislation on state subjects. So Parliament did, or the union government did, rather stubbornly introduce farm laws without a lot of consultation. These laws were heavily criticized. Eventually, these laws had to be repealed, which was something which of a reminder that it is better if we go ahead in a consultative manner in the federal polity of India, rather than just trying to run roughshod over a variety of different stakeholders. So even though the farm laws were well intentioned and most of the farm laws were bringing in the kind of reforms that were already being talked about and being discussed, but yet the way the farm laws were introduced showed the limits of unilateralism in the federal polity of India. So these are broadly, by and large, reasonable measures, reasonable instances, positive instances, right, that have been mentioned over here. If you want, you can add more to it. That's your choice. What are the measures to build trust and strengthen federalism that you can mention? We can strengthen cooperative federalism by having inclusive decision making, by involving states in policy formulation at an early stage. So rather than states being silent spectators of what is happening, states should be involved from day zero. Niti Aayog can play a positive role in this regard. We should take a couple of more steps positive in terms of ensuring the fiscal autonomy of states, because states have been recurringly complaining that center is now collecting a lot of cess and surcharge which they are not sharing with the states. This does not form a part of the shareable pool of taxes. So states have been complaining that these cesses and surcharges are not making sense. They are diverting resources away from states, number one. Number two, maybe states can be helped by allowing them to explore, more sources of taxation, better sources of taxation, stronger sources of taxation, right? So in terms of fiscal autonomy, right, we can think in terms of trying to help them get greater autonomy by maybe giving them more untied funds than what we have already done. What are untied funds? These are funds which you can use for whatever purposes you want to use for, depending upon your governance needs and administrative needs of your state, etc. Right? So GST compensation mechanism is obviously run out of time, right? But we need to make sure that there aren't any delays in the sharing of states' share of GST, and we need to, of course, strengthen the entire GST framework so that we can mop up indirect taxes more efficiently without really burdening the masses too much, right? We need to decentralize the decision making down to Panchayati Raj institutions and urban local bodies, because then the quality of decisions will improve, the relevance of decisions will improve, the allocation of resources will improve. That will be very, very helpful, right? So any reform which can help us in achieving the letter and spirit of the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act will be very helpful in this regard, providing financial autonomy as well as administrative autonomy, and more than autonomy, I would say financial capability enhancement and administrative capability enhancement at the local Panchayati Raj institution levels will be very, very helpful. Center should actively avoid encroachment on state powers, be it related to agriculture, law and order, or health. The kind of run-ins that the central government has with, let us say, the Union Territory of Delhi, with the National Capital Territory of Delhi, and the way the relationship is going to evolve between, let us say, the center and, let us say, the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir is something which is going to be keenly watched, right? So we don't want to go down roads where, we are ramming into one another every now and then, because that doesn't really create a very positive atmosphere. So we can highlight that as well. Apart from that, there are areas such as labor reforms, agricultural policies. These are very much under the state authority, and it would be relevant if we could help states do the right set of things when it comes to these areas. We can strengthen the interstate councils, very neglected bodies, very underutilized bodies in India. So there is a requirement for revival of these forums for discussion and dispute resolution. This can enhance center-state dialogue, state-state dialogue. It can help in taking care of regional issues at the regional level. There can be reforms in the finance commission's approach towards giving recommendations, right? So finance commission, when it comes out with its next set of recommendations coming ahead in the few years, so they should respect the changing demographics, economic needs and developmental levels of various states. For instance, there are a lot of issues regarding the population parameter which is being used by finance commission to decide which state should get what kind of share from the center's divisible pool of taxes. So a lot of southern states, they are complaining that we should not be penalized for doing well in terms of controlling our population, because now if you look at the percentage share of the southern states in India's population, that has come down. So that will result in a reduced number of seats in Lok Sabha. If that also results into a reduced allocation of money to these states, so these states are not going to take it very kindly. So we need to be very, very mindful of this aspect going ahead. There are challenges to center-state relations that we have to be mindful of, that we have to try and tackle. For instance, regional political conflicts, right? So regional political differences, they can often lead to friction. There is fiscal stress on states. For instance, Kerala is under a massive debt. It is, under continuous borrowing spree to take care of its revenue expenditure. That's just one example. There are so many more examples of states reeling under fiscal stress. And like I mentioned to you, that there is always this complaint of growing centralization in various different fields, be it law enforcement, be it health, or be it any other field, right? So the conclusion, broadly speaking, has to be a balanced conclusion where you are acknowledging the good that has been done and you are also mentioning the things that can be done better going ahead, right? So recent changes in center-state relations, as discussed in the arenas of taxation, governance, and fiscal federalism, they have opened opportunities as well as challenges for cooperative federalism. Yes, we need to build mutual trust. Yes, we need to enhance fiscal autonomy, show greater respect for the state governments, have stronger institutional mechanisms, whether it is Niti Aayog, whether it is Interstate Council, whether it is Finance Commission, right? Federalism is important to India for the kind of challenges that we as a country face. Subcontinental size, largest population in the world, with the coming challenges of climate change and increasing aspirations of our population, there is a requirement for dialogue, for decentralization, for balanced resource sharing. Going ahead, we must collaborate closely so that national interests can be achieved even while we try to satisfy regional aspirations, all the while fostering unity and preserving our diversity. So this is the kind of conclusion, this is the broad direction in which you are supposed to go with your answers. I would really encourage you to do answer writing practice. I am creating this platform only and only so that you can be encouraged to do answer writing practice. It's not so much about the money that you will pay, it's so much about the effort that you will put in for doing this answer writing that is going to always be so beneficial for you. I know that these questions have been asked and will not be asked very easily in the immediate next cycle of the examination, but doing practice on these questions will start getting you there. That is what you need to remember. I don't want to create this platform where 10,000 people are, doing answer writing practice. I don't see that happening, but 100 students, good students using this platform the way it was meant to use and making a difference in their lives. If that happens, I will be the happiest person on earth, right? Now explain the reasons for the growth of public interest litigation in India, right? And as a result of it, do you think that Supreme Court of India has emerged as the world's most powerful judiciary? This is the question that you have to tackle. So you need to speak in an educated manner about this entire topic of public interest litigation. So PIL, right? Yes, people are using it a lot these days to access justice, right? To bring the voices and issues and concerns of the marginalized and weaker sections of the society in front of the judiciary. Because many a times those who are marginalized, those who are the subaltern weaker section of the population, they suffer in silence because they do not have the easy access to justice which maybe the more privileged section of society may have, right? So if I am, let us say, a public spirited individual or a group, then I can approach the judiciary on behalf of these sections because they themselves may not be able to do so. So PIL was introduced in 1980s, and since then it has made judiciary an active player in governance, in the sense that judiciary does not need to wait for a proper case to emerge in front of it. It can pick up an issue thanks to PIL getting filed, right, in the courts, right, and a lot of fundamental rights get protected over a period of time, right. So PILs has definitely helped judiciary expand its role, and yes, our judges, our judiciary, they are one of the more powerful judiciaries in the world for sure, right. So what is the reason for growth of PIL? Right, access to justice for the marginalized, right. So the idea is that the economically weaker and marginalized section of society, they can seek legal remedies. For instance, in the Hussain Ara Khatun versus the state of Bihar, a PIL was filed to secure release of thousands of under trial prisoners who were languishing in jail just because they couldn't afford the legal representation, right? So they were under trial prisoners. Nothing has been proven. Nothing has been conclusively, you know, said about what should be done regarding the supposed crimes that they have done, right? And yet they are in prison for longest period of time, running into years. So this was PIL's magic, or the benefit of PIL that helped bring this issue to light. Judicial activism and expansion of fundamental right. So PN Bhagwati, VR Krishna Iyer, they began expanding the scope of Article 21, which we've already discussed once in this particular discussion, right? And with the expansion of Article 21, we have been able to read several different rights into Article 21. Like for instance, right to education, health, clean environment have all been read into Article 21, which is right to life and personal liberty. So your MC Mehta versus Union of India, Supreme Court ruled on environmental protection issues, again broadening the scope of Article 21. These are good examples that you can try to cite. Supreme Court has been able to uphold social and economic justice, for example, with growing inequality, right? Government of India was not able to, address this issue head on, right? So there were a lot of issues that were coming up, right? So one form of equality is gender inequality. So access to workplaces, access to safe workplaces was a very pressing issue. So in Vishaka versus state of Rajasthan, so the court laid down guidelines to address sexual harassment at workplace, because without a safe environment, you will not be able to overcome gender inequality in India, right? Because at that point of time, there wasn't any relevant legislation also. So court stepped in. Relaxation of locus standi, meaning that I am not exactly involved in this particular matter of yours, yet if I am concerned enough, then I can file a PIL and let's see where the case goes, right? So the traditional legal doctrine of legal locus standi, it says that only affected individuals can file a case. I may not be an affected individual directly, but I am watching it, I am looking at it, I am hearing about it, I am pained, and if I am pained enough to file a PIL, so be it. So as a third party, I can file petition on behalf of disadvantaged groups, right? So that's good. Media and civil society support. So they have by and large played a positive role in terms of highlighting public concerns. They have also played a positive role in the growth of PILs. So issues of environmental degradation, corruption, human rights violations, a lot of these issues are regularly exposed by the media, right? And that exposure somewhere or the other fuels this tendency to file PIL. What is the impact of PIL on India's Supreme Court? So definitely judiciary has been able to play a more active role because of the advent of PIL, right? So there is an clear increase in the judicial intervention in matters of governance. We have been able to step into areas which were traditionally reserved for executive and the legislative branches, right? So for instance, the implementation of right to food through the People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India, it led to expansion of food distribution, nutrition, and so on and so forth. So much so that we have this National Food Security Mission, which is probably the biggest subsidized food distribution mechanism in the world right now, right? We have been able to broaden the scope of judicial review, right? We will be able to include executive actions, policies, and legislations within the within the purview of our area of work, right? So for instance, in the coal allocation scam, court intervened, I would say rightly or wrongly, and led to the cancellation of coal block allocation, Just hold on for 1 second. Right. So judiciary as a protector of fundamental rights. So proactive stance, proactive efforts by the judiciary through PILs, it has definitely added to the robustness of our institution. For instance, this Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India case, it again reflects the court's role in being able to uphold individual freedoms. There can definitely be criticism of judicial outreach as well, because see, what is ultimately happening is that you are encroaching upon the domains of the other branches, which is executive and legislature, and somewhere or the other you are undermining the principle of separation of powers, because see, nobody is infallible. Let's not be under this impression that the president, the prime minister, or the chief justice, the chief minister, or the governor of states are infallible reincarnations of God who can never go wrong. Judiciary can also go wrong. So the idea over here is, like, for instance, in this BCCI versus Cricket Association of Bihar, court's intervention in the functioning of BCCI raised concerns regarding judiciary's growing role in regulating private bodies, right? So we will let this slide that BCCI is the richest body in the country and it also needs to, obey the laws of the land, right? We'll leave that as a point aside for the time being. But the idea over here is that there is definitely always going to be accusation of excess and accusation of overreach, right? So is Supreme Court the most powerful judiciary of the world, right? So definitely wide interpretive powers are available with the Supreme Court, with the High Courts, especially regarding the Constitution. So in that regard, yes. Social and economic rights enforcement. So Indian courts, they have taken a proactive stance in enforcing social and economic rights, which are generally considered non-justiciable, in the sense that judiciary as such cannot enforce these kinds of rights in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world. Checks and balances. Yes, there is a growing influence of Supreme Court, and yes, it has drawn criticism of judicial overreach, which you have already discussed, right? So if you compare with other powerful judiciaries like that of United States, right? So uh, they generally do not intervene in governance related issues. So where you have power, you also have responsibility, Spider-Man. So that's what judiciary needs to observe over here, that yes, the growth of PILs has definitely helped in ameliorating the lived reality of variety of marginalized and downtrodden sections of our population. Yes, it has empowered the judiciary to be able to do the things that need to be done right, right? They have been able to ensure social justice and protect the rights. Not only have they been able to emerge as defenders of fundamental rights, but they have also been able to shape public policy. Yes, you are having one of the most powerful judiciaries in the world with a wide-ranging influence, but there is always a requirement to balance activism with the principle of separation of powers and avoid the encroachment upon the domain of other branches of government. That is a sine qua non, and that is also a basic feature of our constitution, right? So the judiciary that is so fond of expounding on the basic structure of the constitution must not forget that separation of powers is also a basic structure of the constitution. So keep that in mind, right? Moving ahead to the next question. Discuss India as a secular state, compare with the secular principles of United States Constitution. This is coming out of nowhere. This is coming out of nowhere. Probably, at least for me, this is coming out of nowhere, being very, very honest with you. So if you also struggle to answer this question, or you are struggling to answer, or forget answering, you are struggling to think that how will you tackle this kind of a question going ahead. So you are not alone, right? So don't beat yourself up, right? So yes, secularism is definitely enshrined in the constitution, that we have to maintain religious neutrality, right? So the idea over here is that our secularism, it emphasizes on equal treatment of all religions. Of course, a lot of groups in India nowadays have started questioning that, how is it equal treatment of all religions when, uh, uh, you know, religious institutions of one particular religion are heavily controlled by the state, and religious institutions of other religions are not controlled by the state. So people have been asking a lot of questions around this. We need to be a little mindful about that as a topic going ahead. But leaving that point aside for the time being, so yes, there is, equal treatment of all religions. We aren't, doing a complete separation from religion, right, in India, where, as I explained to you, the state from time to time has intervened in religious matters. Whereas when you compare with, let's say, the United States of America, so they have a strict separation between religion and state. Of course, again, this can be questioned because on their currency they have printed in the name of God, right? So, this strict separation does exist, but it's not foolproof there either, right? So, but yes, again, coming back to the point that the government does not endorse or favor any religion, right? Now, India as a secular state, constitutional provisions have to be highlighted. The word secular was added to the preamble by Indira Gandhi by the 42nd Amendment Act in 1976. This particular word, as such, was not a part of the preamble. Principles of secularism were always informing the constitution, goes without saying, whether it is Article 25, 26, 27, or 28. Sarva Dharm Sambhav, right? So these articles provide the right to freedom of religion, allowing all citizens to profess, practice, and propagate any religion of their choice. There are elements in India who do not like this word over here called propagate, right? Because this leads to conversion of me from, let's say, one religion to another, and that leads to a lot of religious rancor at the local level, right? Be that as it may, so the state is required to treat all religions equally. There is equal respect for all religions, like I mentioned, Sarva Dharm Sambhav, right? So it's not as if that there is a state-sponsored religion or state religion, official religion in India, right? We are living in harmony and we are protecting minority rights, right? So financial assistance to religious institutions is also provided, right? And we try to make sure that there isn't any discrimination in these institutions. We are having a positive brand of secularism in the sense that we are acknowledging the importance of religions in public life, even while trying to maintain state neutrality, right? So to ensure social justice and equality, we will intervene. Like for instance, we intervened in this practice of triple talaq, right? So the state intervened and abolished this practice because we felt that this is doing harm to the noble principle of gender justice, right? So it's not as if that we will completely turn a blind eye towards anything and everything that is happening in the name of religion. Minority rights are thoroughly protected in India, right? Goes without saying. So a constitution provides a special provision for cultural and education rights of minorities under Article 30 of the Constitution, right? Now coming to the secularism in the United States, right? So the First Amendment of the US Constitution, it guarantees freedom of religion. It guarantees freedom of religion by prohibiting Congress from making laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, right? So whether it is the establishment clause or it is the free exercise clause, both are there, right? There is a strict separation between the church and the state. Government neither promotes nor interferes in religious practices. There is a separation of the church and the state, right? So there is apparently a negative secularism. That is probably how we interpret it, right? I'm not sure whether they will call their secularism as a negative secularism. Be that as it may, right? State cannot sponsor or endorse any religion. It cannot impede religious practices, right? Provided that there is no violation of the public order, right? They cannot fund public religious institutions. They cannot fund and public spaces are devoid of religious symbols. There is freedom of religion, right? So we can intervene in the name of social reform. In US, such interventions are largely absent, right? So religious practices, they will be protected provided you are not breaking any law. So for instance, in the US Supreme Court's ruling, Engel versus Vital, it banned state-sponsored prayer in public school. So that's example of maintaining a strict separation between religious and state, state being the schools, public schools, right? There is non-preferentialism. So US government, it is prohibited from giving preferential treatment to any religion. So there is a wall of separation, right? Apart from that, what is the comparison now between Indian and US brands of secularism, right? So when it comes to state religion relationship, as you would have probably understood, we have been known to regulate and intervene, but usually the US would prefer a hands-off approach, right? whether it is banning of sati or whether it is regulation of temple finances. We have intervened, we have gotten ourselves involved. In US, it would have been seen as a violation of the First Amendment. Our secularism, it's more about state neutrality because we have so many different religions. US secularism emphasizes non-involvement of the state in religious matters, whether X religion or Y religion. And you have to appreciate that when the Constitution of the United States of America was drafted, there weren't very many religions to start off with, to be really honest. So their birth of secularism and our birth of secularism is very different. It's something which we would probably like to appreciate. Judiciary, it often interprets secularism as a means to promote social justice to make sure that everybody is on the same level playing field. Shah Bano case. US judiciary, it ensures protection of individual religious freedom. Right. So there the focus is on the individual. Here the focus is on the social. Religious freedom, we are both guaranteeing religious freedom. The approach is slightly different. Right. We are a country which needs social reforms, whereas in US, when we are protecting your religious freedom, we are protecting your practices from government intrusion, so long as you are not breaching public safety. There are challenges and criticisms there. There are challenges and criticisms here, right? So, like I mentioned to you, that Hindu temples financial regulations are really tight, but when it comes to mosques, churches, the regulation of finances is not so tight, right? So there is inconsistency over here, right? So that the state intervention, right, is so much. It's about pick and choose. You are intervening where you could intervene. You are not intervening where you don't want to intervene, right? Now going ahead, there is this debate on uniform civil code, that we want to bring uniform civil code because a lot of Hindu religious practices were codified in law as appropriate, inappropriate, allowed, not allowed. Similar kind of treatment also needs to be done to the practices of other religions in India, for which we need a uniform civil code, right? There is a lot of debate around it right now. In the US model of criticism, the criticism is US model of secularism. The criticism is that you are allowing religion to permit public life in indirect ways. So yes, there is constitutional separation, but Christian prayers and symbols, they're definitely present in public settings, right? And that is seen as a violation of the Establishment Clause, like I mentioned, that in God we trust is written on the US currency no less, and references to God are very much there in the political discourse. So these are seen as contradictions. But then again, as a politician, I am still an individual. I also have a right to practice my religion, provided I am not doing any harm. So you can see that the debate can be debated both ways. That's what the idea over here is, right? So both these countries are preeminently secular states. They have their own models of secularism, and you have to respect, like I mentioned, you have to respect the historical and cultural context in which our secularism was born versus their secularism was born, right? So our model of secularism promotes equal respect for all religion. It allows state to intervene for social reform. US has a strict separation between the church and the state. We are both trying to protect religious freedom. Approach is different, right? The level of involvement is different, right? But the core principles, like I said, the core principles is freedom of religion, and that is guiding our legal frameworks and the governance architecture. All right, moving ahead to the next one. Citizens Charter. It has been a landmark initiative. It has helped in ensuring citizen-centric administration in the sense that things get done in a time-bound manner in a public office. You get your services on time, apparently, right? But this Citizens Charter has not achieved its full potential yet. So what are the factors which are hindering the realization of the promise of the concept of Citizens Charter? And what are the kind of measures that can be taken so that we can overcome those factors which are hindering the realization of the potential, right? So you have to use certain keywords over here: transparency, accountability, responsiveness, right? information, services standards, grievance mechanism. So these are the words that you have to use in your story, and I'm sure you are appreciating that Citizens Charter was supposed to be a tool to enhance transparency, accountability, responsiveness. It was all about putting into place service standards and putting into place grievance mechanism that if there is a body which is not performing up to the mark, then I, as let us say a customer of that particular body, can raise grievances and get my problem solved. So the idea over here is that it was supposed to improve upon the interface between the governed and the government. It was having fantastic potential, but we have not been able to achieve that full potential. So the importance of Citizens Charter is well understood in terms of promoting transparency and accountability, in improving the public service delivery, in getting in certainty, right? That what is the timeline? Like if I have applied for a ration card, how much time will it take for me to receive my ration card? If I have applied for an Aadhaar card, how much time will it take for me to receive an Aadhaar card? So it makes the administration citizen centric and I would say customer centric, in the sense that you are shifting your focus from your internal problems to my problems as your customer, as your citizen, right? So I tend to trust you more if I know what will be the timeline that you will be following, what is it that I can expect out of you. So it therefore bridges the gap between me and the public institution, because I trust you more. I know what I can expect from you. And if I know what I have to expect from you, and if I don't get it, then I should be also be able to red flag it, should be able to raise it up, and therefore there's a grievance redressal mechanism which gives me an avenue to release my frustration, to release my sense of disappointment in a manner such that it helps bring about a positive change going ahead, right? So what are the factors which is hindering the realization of citizens charter potential? There is a lack of awareness, especially in rural areas, especially amongst the lesser educated citizens in our country regarding their rights. There is poor implementation and monitoring. There is apathy, right? So there needs to be a lot of follow up. There needs to be a lot of monitoring, which is right now not happening, right? So a lot of these charters, they are just hanging like some, really badly printed, paper or something like that on a very dirty, government office ka wall, which really nobody really cares anything about, right? That's how things are in a lot of public offices. We need to kind of improve that. There has to be a bureaucratic resistance which needs to be overcome, right? There has to be this sense of accountability. There has to be this sense of compliance, true accountability that should inform the working of our administrators. We need well-defined timelines. We need measurable performance standards, and we need to make sure that we are holding people accountable for delivery, right? There has to be a stronger legal backing. Right now we don't have much of it, right? So in a lot of countries, citizens charter, they are legally enforceable. In India it remains a voluntary initiative. We need proper legal backing procedures for it. But again, the idea over here is that if you start creating laws for anything and everything, then do we have the capacity to enforce those laws? Then that will become a joke in itself, right? Grievance redressal mechanism that I spoke so highly of, does it really work? Whom are you going to go to complain to, right? Because these grievances go unaddressed because there isn't enough resource available to address your grievances. Addressing grievances is yet another, work in progress. So a lot of studies have found that less than 40% of the grievances, they are resolved in a timely manner. I would be surprised if even 35% would be getting solved in a timely manner. So what are the measures to overcome the challenges? I would really suggest that there has to be a very strong emphasis on capacity building within the government bodies. There has to be a diktat from the top that this needs to work, that this will be monitored, that we will be doing surprise checks right from the top to see what is actually getting done at the grassroots level in the local offices, in the ministries, and in our institutions. So that would be a first good step. Probably that is something that needs to be done before we start creating public awareness, because once mass awareness is there, social media etc is there, you know what will happen, right? So information kiosks, mobile applications, the more we use technology, the lesser will be the manual intervention that will be required, and that will make everybody's lives that much more easier. We need to strengthen legal framework, right? We can think in terms of putting into place a legislation that can give a promise of certain service standards, which if not delivered will lead to problems, right? Like for example, the Right to Public Services Acts in the state of Maharashtra, it penalizes delays in service deliveries. Maybe we can have this as a pan-India model once we are able to establish that yes, this is a good model to follow. We need to build institutional capacities. We need to train government employees, right? They are the providers of these services. Monitoring, evaluation, all that is fine, but there has to be an internal drive within our bureaucrats and officers. Independent oversight bodies can be established to review the performance of public services. We need to have an empowered grievance redressal system, real-time tracking of grievances and their resolution. We need to customize charter to local needs, right? It shouldn't be a cut copy paste of charter from here and there, right? We need to have charters which actually work, right, as per the demands, as per the context in which they are being implemented. There is a strong role for technology in enhancing the charter's effectiveness. So e-governance initiatives can be taken in a very big way. Digital India initiatives can be taken up in a very big way. Like I said that, if I'm applying for anything which the government needs to send to me or need to give to me in the form of printout, just mail me, send it on my mobile, send it as a WhatsApp. Don't make me come and go. That would be the best thing. Use a lot of data analytics to improve upon the service delivery. So try to monitor the service delivery as much as you can using technology interventions, and then try to improve on an iterative basis. So the conclusion is that yes, this is a significant initiative, and yes, going ahead, transparency, accountability, and citizen centricity is only going to increase, not decrease. Yes, there is untapped potential which we can try to tap by way of creating awareness, by way of implementation, by way of pushing the bureaucracy, and by way of strengthening the grievance redressal mechanism. That is what we need to do. We'll eventually be able to make it into a powerful tool for enhancing public service delivery and ensuring good governance. Moving ahead to the next question. In a crucial domain like public healthcare system, Indian states should play a vital role to contain the adverse impact of marketization of the system. Suggest some measures through which the state can enhance the reach of public healthcare at the grassroots level, right? So this is your question. How can we enhance the reach of public healthcare at the grassroots level? All right. So let us start the discussion for this particular question. The key aspect over here is marketization, meaning that the role of the private sector or the role of the paid healthcare system, adverse impact of that, because not everybody can afford out of pocket expenditure. Not everybody has that kind of money, income, wealth, or asset that is required to be able to fund that kind of healthcare. So how can we improve the reach of public healthcare which is actually working at the grassroots level, so that people don't have to put money out of their pockets, right? So if you really want to have equitable access to healthcare, if you really want to improve the healthcare outcomes of the entire society, especially of the marginalized and vulnerable section of society, your public healthcare system needs to do a much better job. But if you are relying on the private sector, if you are relying on the market force of demand and supply, then the outcome will be rising cost, unequal access, and a focus on for-profit institutions rather than public welfare. So therefore, Indian state has to, whether it likes it or not, play an active role in enhancing the reach of public healthcare, especially at the grassroots level, right? That is very, very important. So what are the challenges of marketization in healthcare? The first biggest challenge is the increasing cost or the inflation in the healthcare industry in India, right? So the moment you start relying too heavily upon the private sector, who are basically a for-profit entity, you will find that healthcare service will start becoming more and more unaffordable, right? Just the way our schools today charge in cities such as Bombay anywhere between 1.5 to 2.5 lakh rupees per annum for a child's education in probably fifth standard, sixth standard or something like that, right? So that is where healthcare is also headed. So our out-of-pocket expenditure on healthcare, it is one of the highest in the world, and that's not something that we need to be proud of. There will be a problem of unequal access because market failures will be there in this particular system, in the sense that You will provide healthcare services to those who are affluent, to those who have that kind of payment capacity, who have those kinds of insurances. You will not want to create solutions for the lower income groups simply because it's just not profitable enough, right? So your private healthcare facilities, A, will be concentrated in cities and B, will be targeting the affluent within those cities by and large. Quality versus profit, right? There may be a possibility that you may prioritize profits, although this cannot happen that easily in this particular sector because it is heavily regulated sector and there cannot be any compromises over here. Now, what are the measures that we can take to enhance public healthcare at the grassroots level that actually works, right? So here you have to already you have to speak about the already initiated government schemes and programs, and you have to try and suggest improvements and reforms in terms of strengthening these schemes and programs. So we can definitely try to start with this strengthening of the primary healthcare infrastructure, because if we can catch the disease young, we can catch the problem young, then nothing like it. For which we need to significantly expand our health and wellness centers. We can increase the number of these centers. We can improve the basic healthcare services that we are offering through these centers. We can upgrade the sub centers and primary healthcare centers so that relevant healthcare services are available at the doorstep. For instance, Kerala's robust network of PHCs that has been very, very helpful in achieving the kind of health indicators that Kerala boasts about. We can definitely increase budget allocation for healthcare. If you look at our expenditure allocation, center plus states combined, so that has definitely been increasing over the last couple of years, but there is significant room for further increase if we want to improve the outcomes, right? So for instance, the National Health Policy 2017, it recommended an increase in public health expenditure to 2.5% of GDP. That's a target that is yet to be achieved. Enhancing the role of ASHA workers and auxiliary and midwives, right? So definitely that can be done. So training and empowerment can be done, right? Of these ASHAs and ANMs. So they are already doing a reasonably decent job in good parts of the country. That can be strengthened even further. I would like to just mention once over here that I forgot suddenly forgot Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee. So they did this fantastic work in West Bengal where they found out that by providing proper training and qualification, some kind of qualification to these quacks, to these informal doctors, that is significantly helpful in making them very productive in improving the outcomes, right? So definitely training and empowerment can work, putting into place an incentive structure, compensation and incentives linked to the amount of help that they are able to provide one way or the other. That would be really, really helpful. So Ashas, they have played an important role in reducing infant and maternal mortality in India, and going ahead, we can do an even more fantastic job. We can, we are gradually increasing the coverage under Ayushman Bharat, right? Probably 10 15 years down the line we will be able to provide universal health coverage over there as well. So your Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, right? So that's basically an insurance kind of a affair over here, right? Where I can go and get treated in private healthcare hospitals through a cashless mechanism over here, because I am being provided up to 5 lakh rupees per annum of insurance cover for secondary and tertiary hospitalization. So that definitely can help the poor and vulnerable section of the population. There are significant implementational issues with this particular scheme. That's a separate problem. We'll be discussing that alag se, but genuinely this is something which is really, really helpful. Digital health and telemedicine, right? So we can promote a lot of telemedicine. So no particular area is untouched by technology. So wherever you are answering any question, you have to talk about technology. So digitization of health record, promotion of telemedicines, making this health record easily accessible, you know, through a dashboard kind of an approach. Maybe you can link it with Aadhaar card, etc., etc. So that would be really, really helpful in giving some kind of continuity in what was the diagnosis done, let's say even 5 years ago by anybody, so that whoever is going ahead looking at the records of the person is getting a comprehensive view of everything that has been diagnosed, everything that has been tested, what are the problems. So if you can have that kind of a comprehensive view about me, so that becomes really, 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 really helpful, right? Regulating and monitoring of private healthcare, it needs to be strengthened. Price regulation, whether you like it or not, is required. These stocks, healthcare stocks, hospital stocks, you know, all said and done, it needs to be tempered, right? Profit motive is fine, but that profit motive has to be tempered, right? So price regulation of essential services is very, very important, whether it is medical services, drugs, or equipments. So we do have a national pharmaceutical pricing authority which needs to get its game right, right? Public-private partnership for rural healthcare. So maybe we can have something like a viability gap funding over here in place where we can incentivize private players to set up a chain of hospitals across the rural landscape, at least at the interface of towns and rural centers, so that people have better access to healthcare, right? And they can charge an X amount of money, and the state can put in a Y amount of money, and that X plus Y can become a meaningful amount of money for the healthcare provider, and people get the service that they need. So you can definitely collaborate with the private sector, right? Like for instance, there's a PPP model in Chhattisgarh's Mukhyamantri Bal Hriday Suraksha Yojana. It's providing free cardiac surgeries for children apparently, right? You can strengthen the regulatory framework around standards of care, transparency, and accountability. So there is already a Clinical Establishment Registration and Regulation Act of 2010. We can actually think in terms of better implementation of this particular law. We have to improve awareness and bring about health literacy. So community health awareness campaigns can be highlighted, as well as school-based health programs can be strengthened. Swachh Bharat mission can be expanded in multiple different dimensions, right? So that will be very, very helpful again. Midday meal programs can be expanded in a variety of different dimensions to start incorporating these concerns of ours. We don't need to have multiplicity of programs. We can do a good job with our existing programs, and that will be helpful, right? Moving ahead to the next question, e-governance. So e-governance, it's not just about routine application of digital technology in service delivery process. It is about multifarious interactions for ensuring transparency and accountability. Evaluate the role of interactive service model of e-governance, right? So what they are essentially trying to say is that e-governance is not just about, instead of printing it out, we are mailing it. That's not e-governance. It's not just about that. So that's just routine tweaking of the process, routine tweaking of the process using technology. E-governance is much more than that. That's what the basic crux of the question is. And somewhere you need to bring into place this interactive service model, in the sense that, can I just talk with the chatbot and get whatever I need to do? I mean, that's how I am looking at it. That's my first reaction of the bat when I come across this question, right? So it's a transformative approach, right? It's not incremental, it is transformative. So if you're just merely digitizing the existing processes, right? So that's not it. You need to go beyond that to ensure transparency, accountability, and citizen engagement. You need to look at this interactive service model, so where there is a two-way communication between happening the government and the constituents, right? And that two-way communication can happen via bots, happen via AI, it can happen via a variety of different mechanisms, right? So what is this interactive service model? Let us understand it a little bit, right? So we are focusing on the dynamic engagement between citizens and government entities. We are facilitating real-time feedback, real-time suggestion, and real-time inquiries, right? This is a participatory environment which is getting created in a very big way. What are the features? Two-way communication, user-centric approach, right? Integration of technology in a very, very big way, having websites, having mobile apps, having social media, having that interaction, having that feedback, making sure that responsiveness is there. So we are putting into place a system which is extremely powerful over here. It will take time, but it's a system which can be started with something which is very, very rudimentary, right? Like for example, how we did, right? I had to book a vaccination slot. So I didn't have to run around helter skelter to book a vaccination slot. A platform was there. It was interacting with me, right? It was asking for my details, giving me a step-by-step guideline, booking my details, giving me some kind of a confirmation, giving me a reminder, me going over there, me getting my vaccination shot, telling me that, okay, you are done. Thank you. This is your certification number, blah, 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 right? So this system, this interactive service model, it significantly enhances transparency. It gives you real-time access to information. For example, this e-Sampark initiative in Punjab, It allows citizens to inquire about various government services. It allows you to track applications online. It is an open data initiative. So governments, they can establish data related to budgets, expenditures, and so on and so forth. It significantly promotes accountability. Feedback mechanism is there. For example, the Swachh Bharat Mission app apparently allows citizens to report on cleanliness issues. Tomorrow itself, I'll be starting to experiment with this app if I can and see how interactive it is, whether it really works or not. Right? It fosters citizens' engagement, participatory governance becomes a reality, consultations and surveys become a reality. For instance, the MyGov platform. Right? It provides community forums where you can discuss, complain, raise issues, where the issues can be brought to the attention of the relevant authorities. Yes, there are challenges in implementation of this model because there is a significant digital divide in the country, in the sense that people have limited access to technology still, whether it is internet, whether it is devices, and the digital literacy is low, although it is increasing. If you look at the way social media is exploding across the length and breadth of the country, I don't think that this is going to be a very big problem for a very long period of time. And with the declining rates of mobile phones and declining rate of data in India, I think that this is something which we'll be able to tackle in the next 5-10 years. Yes, there is resistance to change, but once you start seeing good performers and once the bad performer starts getting publicly shamed, things will start improving on its own. Security and privacy concerns are there everywhere. You can highlight the same over here as well. So what are the strategies? So we can expand internet access, we can invest in technology, we can find those projects where we can get quick success. That will be very, very helpful. Capacity building, digital literacy, skill development for officials will be helpful. Robust data protection laws and cybersecurity measures will be helpful. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that yes, this interactive service model where there is a two-way communication, feedback, real-time data sharing, actual solving of the problem on the spot, actual delivery of the goods and services on the spot, that will be supremely helpful in improving transparency, accountability, citizen engagement, good governance. It will significantly improve the NPS of the government if there is one, right? So if we can have this kind of two-way communication going, that will be supremely helpful. Right, there are challenges such as digital divide, resistance to change, security concerns can be easily overcome. We need proof of concepts, we need low hanging fruits, we need quick victories, and then we need to scale up rapidly. That is what we need, and the government will support, the bureaucrats themselves will support, because their workload is decreasing. Why do they need to do everything manually? Why do they need to, see lines and lines and lines and lines of applicants standing in front of them? What's the joy in that? Right? And it's not as if that you can do a lot of bribery these days, because I'll catch you on a camera, put your video on an Instagram, and I'll ruin your career in a moment. So why do I need to interact with a lot of these guys, right? So it's better win. It's win-win-win for everybody. Everybody goes home happy, right? I go home happy because I don't need to, hear angry customers in front of me day long, and you are happy because you don't need to get angry. And politicians who are getting this implemented are happy because they will be able to project this as a massive victory for their government, right? Moving ahead to the next question. So, terrorism, it has become a significant threat to global peace and security. We need to evaluate the effectiveness of United Nations Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee and its associated bodies in addressing and mitigating this threat at the international level. So this UNSC CTC is a joke, right? If you see the operations of various extremist groups across the length and breadth of the world, you will understand that how ineffective this organization is, right? So yes, terrorism is a profound threat for peace, for security. It is affecting every part of the world in terms of loss of life, economic disruption, and societal fear. And CTC can therefore play an important role in controlling this menace, which is exactly why we were establishing this in 2001, so that there can be greater cooperation amongst countries, institutions, and so on and so forth, so that we can have comprehensive counter-terrorism strategies that actually work, right? So let's see what happens over here. So this CTC was established in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, right? With the idea that let's implement the UNSC resolution 1373, which asks us to take steps against terrorism, international cooperation, implementing legal framework, and improving border security. Engagement with the member states. So CTC, it engages with member states to assess their counter-terrorism capabilities, right, and compliance with international obligations. It provides technical assistance and capacity building support. What are the key achievements of the CTC? So we have been able to establish legal frameworks, right? So legal instruments have been put into place. So your International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism, your United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. So these instruments have been put into place thanks to, let us say, the CTC, right? So this global counter-terrorism strategy was adopted in 2006, right? I'm sure you understand what it must be entailing. Yes, there is an increase in the international cooperation amongst member states and international organizations and civil society. So these partnerships have been fostered thanks to some of the efforts that these guys have taken. Capacity building and technical assistance has also increased in the right direction, be it related to border security, criminal justice responses, as well as countering violent extremism. So for instance, in 2021, CTC, it organized a series of workshops for member countries. You understand that the impact has only been marginal because of fragmentation and lack of cohesion, right? Because who my terrorist may be, your champion may be my terrorist, vice versa, right? So priorities, capacities, they are not there. The cohesiveness that should be there, that is not there. The resources and uh, everything that should be available with these kinds of organization in terms of financial resources, human resources, that's not there, right? Developing countries, they do not have the necessary funding, they do not have the necessary resources available to put into place an effective counter-terrorism capabilities. As a result of which, those regions are infested with those problems. Terrorism itself is evolving. It is becoming digital. It is becoming cyber, right? So new tactics, new technologies are there, and these institutions by default are lagging behind, right? So there are other bodies available, like for example, there is this UN Office of Counterterrorism 2017. Under we established this to complement the work of CTC, right? It focuses on implementing the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy. There is a Counterterrorism Executive Directorate as well. It again assists the CTC in monitoring the implementation of UNSC resolutions. It does assessments and creates reports and so on and so forth. There are regional and international cooperations, like for instance, there is cooperation with Interpol, there is cooperation with the Financial Action Task Force, there is cooperation with regional organizations. So you see that we are trying to do what we can try to do in the limited resources that we are having. That's what you need to answer. So this is the approach that you need to take for this particular question. Finally, moving ahead to the last question, discuss the geopolitical and geostrategic importance of Maldives for India with a focus on global trade and energy flows. Discuss how this relationship affect India's maritime security and regional stability. So what are the operational words, if I may encircle the operational words for you, right? Global trade and energy flow, right? Security and regional stability. See, all the pillars have been touched, and probably you saw this question coming because of the kind of rancor that was there between India and Maldives in the last couple of months before this exam was conducted. So yeah, this is a very important topic in that regard, right? So it holds significant geopolitical and geostrategic and geoeconomic importance for India from a trade, from an energy, from a maritime security point of view, from regional stability point of view. It plays a very important role. And unfortunately or fortunately, Maldives is turning into an arena for competition between India and China in terms of who is more dominant in terms of, let us say, with the ruling elite over there, right? So, what is the geopolitical importance of Maldives for India's strategic location? Right, it is situated along key maritime trade routes in the Indian Ocean. A lot of shipping lanes are passing from that particular area. It is very close to the southern tip of India. So yes, definitely, whether it is the sea lanes or whether it is trade and energy security for not only us but for the larger region, Maldives can play an important role on regional affairs. So again, because of the locational advantage, it is having significant bearings on regional geopolitics. So whether it is our engagement with Indian Ocean rim countries or anything else, it's playing an important role. I don't think that this Act East part is relevant over here, right? We can counterbalance Chinese influence in the region if we are having strong relationships with Maldives. In terms of global trade and energy flows, so 80% of India's trade, a lot of energy supplies, they're coming through Indian Ocean, right? Coming through waters close to Maldives. So having control over these routes by having good relationships with Maldives will be very helpful for India. Not being able to control these routes, not having good relationships with Maldives, that's not going to be very helpful. So of course we can control these routes even without having extremely strong relationships with Maldives. But if we have a strong relationship with Maldives, we can do our job much easily, much better. Energy security, again, it's a very vital corridor for energy supplies from Middle East to Asia. So the strategic location of Maldives, it does give us that kind of, comfort, right? Maldives can be a transit point for Indian energy firms. In terms of collaboration on maritime security initiatives, so we do joint naval exercises, we do joint training programs, so that there is interoperability, so that we can combat piracy, human trafficking, illegal fishing, and such other menaces jointly. What is the impact on maritime security and regional stability? They can be very helpful in terms of countering China's string of pearls strategy. Of course, China is trying to convert Maldives into one of the pearls of this string of pearls. We need to counter that. So if we can strengthen relationships with Maldives, then we can keep an eye on what China is doing in our region, what China is doing in Sri Lanka, what China is doing in Pakistan, what China is doing in Africa. We can try to have some kind of domain awareness, right? So India, through its IOR maritime security strategy, it wants to enhance cooperation among littoral states. It also wants to enhance relationship with Maldives. We want to share information. We want to get and give information. We want to get and give capacity building. We want to get and give support in the joint training and surveillance mechanisms, right? And of course, regional stability and economic development can be improved. So that will be very, very helpful, right? So India's $1.4 billion of developmental assistance to Maldives was given so that they can build out their infrastructure, so that they can build out a good relationship with us, right? Challenges and future prospects. So yes, the domestic political landscape in Maldives can be difficult. Fluctuating leadership over there can be difficult because some parties are in favor of India, some parties are not in favor of India. So Abdullah Yamin, for instance, tilted too heavily in favor of China, but Ibrahim Mohammed Soli helped in strengthening ties with India. We don't need to take a very strong side on in their politics. We need to have a more bipartisan approach to make sure that we are in good books with everybody concerned. Regional competition, right? So yes, China is entering, so we need to maintain our strong presence in that region. And ultimately, there are also environmental challenges. Like for instance, Maldives is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. Political stability, economic viability of that country is very, very important because they are right under our back door, right? So we can help them out in a very big way. We need to play the role over here that we can play. So yes, the geopolitical and geostrategic significance of Maldives is not lost on us, whether it is trade routes, energy flows, maritime security, or regional stability. So by having strong ties, bipartisan strong ties with Maldives, we will be able to secure our interests, region's interests, and be able to keep China at a bay. Challenges are that the domestic politics in Maldives is something that we cannot always control. Regional competition with countries such as China is something that we cannot really avoid, and the environmental vulnerability is something which is a reality for everybody. Nevertheless, we need to try and have a mutually beneficial relationship based on proactive engagement, based on playing a positive role, not just for Maldives, but for the larger Indo-Indian Ocean region, and secure a predominant place for ourselves in our backyard in South Asia. So this is the approach that you can take for this question. I hope you have learned a lot from this particular discussion. You'll get more such videos from me on a regular basis. Thank you so much. All the best and Jai Hind to all of you. Thank you.